ports open.
Holy happy hour, Batman. I am Father Ben, and I'm an Episcopal priest. I am co-founder of the All Ports Open Network and Apon Games. And on this show, Holy Happy Hour Batman, I am joined each week by heroes of the gaming and geek world to talk all about life, faith, spirituality, game design philosophy, and normally whatever else comes up. But tonight we have a very special episode. I'm really excited about this episode because we're crowning a new most returningest guest tonight as Jason Cordova of the Gauntlet returns. This is going to kind of change things up because tonight we're going to be tomorrow, we are going to be launching, Apon Games is launching our next game, and this is a game that I happen to write called Broken. It's an RPG of tragic romance for 2 players, and Jason is joining the show to do kind of a cool reverse interview thing, and we're going to be talking all about Broken. We're also probably going to chime in a little bit about that successful Brindlewood Bay Kickstarter that just wrapped up not too long ago, and the last time that Jason was on the show here. So we're going to talk about all of that with Jason and more in just a few minutes, so stick around as we get into this episode. I like that we're already getting some cocktail chatter in the chat there. That's great. We'll get to that cocktail in just a second. And if you do have the ingredients to make it, hey, feel free to run, grab them, mix up the drink while we're doing the show here. That would be really cool. Before we get into the episode, we do have a couple of huge announcements I want to make from Apon Games. I want to talk to you all about them before we kind of get into the show. I'll try to keep the announcements brief here, but they're so awesome you don't want to miss them. So this past Friday, we had a special launch stream to officially launch Apon Games, our analog game branch of the All Ports Open Network. You may know that we successfully itch-funded our first game, The Hard Lessons, in May. Obviously, as I said, Broken itch funds beginning tomorrow morning. Now we've officially launched Apon Games, including our website. You can go to apongames.com and check out our website and our revamped Patreon. So this is what I'm really excited about telling you. So if you want to get all the announcements, check out Apon Games on YouTube. The link will be in the show notes here. Maybe I'll be able to drop it in the chat too here while we're talking. But you can go to the Apon Games YouTube, watch the launch stream if you missed it on Friday, catch all of the big announcements. The one I really want to highlight is that we are releasing from Apon Games a brand new cyberpunk themed system-neutral campaign setting called New Korai City. This was written by my Apon co-founder, Joshua Wise. It's a really awesome system-neutral campaign setting. I think you're going to really, really like it. The Jumpstart book, there's a free version of the Jumpstart book that you could download right now if you go to patreon.com/allportsopen, and it's going to be a Patreon release for this New Korai City content. The way it's going to work, if you support Apon there are several levels, but you can back at $5 a month, and you will get monthly releases for this campaign setting that will all build up to an adventure. We go into some more detail in the launch stream for you to check out. And yes, Deb Presto says in the chat, going to check it out. I'm really excited to hear that. Like I said, there's a free version of the Jumpstart, so you can read all about New Korai City and what we're doing with it in that free version. And it looks awesome. And Josh did really great work on it, so I hope everyone will check it out. It's really worth backing and jumping into. If you like Cyberpunk and you have a system you like to play that in, it's a really cool content, so it's a really great campaign setting. There are awesome $10 and $25 levels too. So yeah, go to patreon.com/allportsopen. If you're watching this on YouTube after the fact, after we're live, it'll all be down there in the show notes. Actually, on YouTube, I think it's down in the show notes right now, so you can go ahead and check that out. All right, so it is happy hour, and of course, that means here at Holy Happy Hour Batman, we do in fact have a cocktail recipe on the screen. And so, as I was telling Jason Cordova before the show, my opportunity here to be self-indulgent and do a recipe based on the game Broken. I am really excited to share this cocktail with you because it's awesome. So this is sort of a cinnamon maple bourbon cocktail, and I'm calling it a tragic cocktail for a tragic romance game. And so it's just bourbon, 2 ounces of bourbon, 1 ounce of fresh lemon juice, maple syrup and cinnamon syrup. You could theoretically, I guess, just if you don't have cinnamon syrup at your disposal, that's something I keep in my fridge because I make a lot of those kinds of cocktails and I'm always making it for the show. If you don't have cinnamon syrup, if you're not like me, you could theoretically find a way to make cinnamon work in a different way. Maybe if you have like just some extra cinnamon sticks, or if you I guess you could use cinnamon spice or something along those lines. There's got to be a way you could do it. Just sort of take maple syrup, add cinnamon if you want. And so basically what you do is you're just going to fill a cocktail shaker with ice, like maybe 3/4, or a mason jar or something along those lines. Add the other ingredients, take like a long spoon and stir for about 30 seconds. And then you're going to want to either strain it or just kind of carefully pour it into a coupe glass, or it could be a low ball if you're not going to be fancy about it. You don't want to serve it up, but, serve it without the ice. And, okay, all right, so Lone Ranger's going to make this cocktail after he runs to the store. Great, I love that. But yeah, so you're going to want to then take the garnish is really important for this because it's based off of the game Broken, and you're going to want to take a cinnamon stick and snap that cinnamon stick in half, and then use that as the garnish. And you can drink the cocktail and remember when times were better. So that's my Broken themed tragic cocktail. In about 5 minutes or maybe a little more, the recipe card for this cocktail will be available on my Twitter. It'll just go live at 7:45. So find me at Benjamin Wallace on Twitter, and you can get that cocktail recipe. So, because I'm about to take it off the screen so we can bring our guest, Jason Cordova, here on the show. So, all right, without further ado, let us go ahead and transition Jason onto the show, bring him onto the show. Jason, welcome back to Holy Happy Hour, Batman.
Hey, Benjamin. Thank you for having me again for the third time, I guess.
It is the third time. You are now as I said, you're our most recurringest guest. It was Jeff Stormer. No, well,
right.
Jeff Stormer was tied for, I think Jeff was on twice, but also Meg Baker was on twice.
Okay.
And so now you have stolen the championship belt.
I have the crown. Yeah, the Holy Happy Hour crown is mine. Yeah.
Exactly. As our most recurringest guest. So you were on just not that long ago, but to talk during the Brindlewood Bay Kickstarter, and it was a little bit of a success, you could say.
It was, indeed. Yeah.
Congratulations! It's so awesome that it was.
Thank you.
I was hyping that thing up the whole time. Telling people about it, excited to watch it go up and up and up. And another fun little thing we already kind of talked about before the show, but is worth maybe mentioning, is for people who know me in real life and some of our people in our chat who know him, you all did a writing contest, right? A mystery contest, I mean.
We did.
Mystery contest.
Yeah, that just wrapped up last week, 2 weeks ago. Yeah.
Yeah, and Blaine Martin, who is my longtime best friend from high school, and one of the co-founders of the All Ports Open Network, who left in our early days, won part of the mystery writing contest.
He did indeed. Won the Sweeps Week mystery, because there was 2 categories. There was like the classic murder mysteries, and then there were the Sweeps Week mysteries. And Blaine's entry, Lights, Camera, Ghost, was the winner of the Sweeps Week category. Yeah.
That's awesome.
So it was good. It had big, strong Scooby-Doo vibes in that one. It was very fun. Fun mystery.
That's awesome. Yeah, I was real proud of Blaine for winning that. Super cool. Very, very cool. But yeah, you all feeling good about the Kickstarter and how everything turned out?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, obviously, we're happy about it being, financially successful. It definitely exceeded our expectations, which was really exciting. It's mostly just been like about kind of hitting the ground and getting it done now, So we're already, the first book, the Brindlewood Bay core book, is already 75% complete layout wise.
Awesome.
So that's almost done, and backers will have it very, very soon. And then Nephews in Peril, which is the supplement book, will probably be whenever Brindlewood Bay comes out in PDF. Nephews will probably be a month later, basically, because that's kind of the schedule we're on. Yeah, and so we're getting this thing cranked out. But of course, Brindlewood Bay existed for a long time before we went to Kickstarter, right? So that not only helped with it kind of being popular, but also it's given us plenty of like runway to like actually get it finished really fast too. So it's pretty exciting.
Yeah, that's awesome.
It's the right way to do it, you know.
Definitely a good turnaround. And like one of the nice things about that is like I've supported a lot of Kickstarters over the years, and this is not meant to be a complaint because I understand how it works. But you know, sometimes you get excited, you back a Kickstarter, and then you kind of like time goes by and you kind of like maybe if you're like me, you forget.
We're guilty of it, right?
Yeah,
I mean, Trophy is like having that issue, you know, but like, I mean, Trophy's like on our end of it is like totally done. We're literally just waiting on the printer to print the books.
Yeah.
that's like literally like all we're waiting on.
Yeah.
You know, everything is like very complicated right now, but in general, yeah, I get it. Like you kind of like, you know, you sort of like you're just backing like with the sort of hope that it's going to get finished and that it's going to get finished in a timely manner. And you know, everybody was kind of thrown for a loop with the global pandemic.
Oh yeah, of course.
You know, I think you know, a lot of people are kind of like working through that and getting through it. But you know, at the end of the day, like I think every like creator who does crowdfunding stuff, I think like gets better and better at the process, right? Like the more you do it.
Yeah.
So I feel like I've learned a lot from our previous campaigns, and I've been able to like put those lessons not only into the marketing of them, but like into the actual production. So that's I guess that's what being in business is about, you know. You sort of like do it and get better at it. So.
Yeah, well, I'm certainly hoping that we're going to get better at all of it as we continue forward. That's my like segue, like my segue.
Yes,
there you go. I found a segue.
Yeah.
Yes. As Apon Games continues to crowdfund and stuff, I'm hoping we also continue to learn and improve.
Well, let's talk about it. I mean, that's what I'm here to do. So
Absolutely.
I know I just know kind of the basics of Broken.
Yeah.
And so this is partially like just informative for me personally, but hopefully like folks watching the video at some point will also get a lot of good information out of it. And so let's do our reverse interview.
Awesome.
I think I want to kick off with just a basic kind of question, like maybe just give me like a high level summary of like what Broken is about.
Yeah, sure, of course. So Broken is a tragic romance game or role-playing game of tragic romance for 2 players about broken objects and broken hearts. So it's a breakup game. In the game, you create 2 characters that each of the 2 players are going to role-play. You create the relationship and the relationship dynamics between the 2 of them. And over the course of 10 scenes, you explore the way those things that you loved or liked or attracted to about the other person sort of fall apart, or you become disillusioned with them until your relationship is over and you finally break up in the 10th scene. And along the way, you also break 10 real-life physical objects. So it's a tragic romance game because every game ends the same way. It always ends in a breakup. But the hope is that there is potential for healing, self-discovery, empathy building, things like that along the way. It's designed to be a emotionally deep game. You know, it explores a lot of themes of like of identity, memory, loss, obviously. And like I said, the hope is that you kind of also explore empathy building and hope and things like that too, along with the tragedy. So yeah, and of course tell a beautiful story, which I hope that it does as well. And so while it can be a very serious and intense game, people have also played it in more lighthearted ways, which is kind of fun. Actually, the sort of deep, intense games are the easy ones to imagine or hear about, and a lot of the actual plays, that's kind of what people are going to be. I think there's going to be a lot of that. But like, I did a demo of this game recently where somebody played Benjamin Franklin and his childhood best friend, who was a talking animal. What was it? I can't remember what kind of animal it was. It was a talking animal of some kind, and it was the most absurd, silly version of the game. They laughed the whole time, and it was like, oh, that's really cool, because it's just like not the typical playthrough of that game, but it worked, and it was fun, and they, you know, got a lot out of it and enjoyed it. So that's basically the kind of really short version, I guess.
The elevator pitch,
yeah,
right?
Exactly.
Yeah, that's good. You know, I find the sort of like ritual gameplay aspect of it, of like breaking objects to represent like sort of like the breaking nature of the relationship, to be really fascinating. And I want to get into that a little bit later.
Yeah, sure.
For sure. But I think like just like as far as like the story goes, like the story that's taking place in Broken, like what are the characters doing in that story? Like what are the characters doing?
Yeah. So the characters themselves are I guess, kind of living their regular lives. So the game is you mentioned a ritual, and I won't get too much into all the ritual aspect necessarily right now, but the game plays with memory. So this kind of is more of like what the players are doing than the characters, but the game is framed around these scenes that are almost like a look back. And so in those scenes then where the characters sort of to answer what the characters are doing question, in the scenes you're getting these sort of slice of life moments from these 10, and it might not end up being 10, but it's written to be 10 sort of little slice of life moments that maybe are the kinds of moments that you would look back if you've ever been in a relationship that's broken up, where you'd look back and at the time maybe they didn't seem super significant, but looking back you can see like, oh, okay, that's when this aspect of the other person became like I became disillusioned with or sort of fell out of love with. And so you're basically like, just the players are just the characters, specifically the characters, are just living their lives. They are like, you know, getting in an argument over the fact that their car broke down and the person who owns the car doesn't have AAA, or they're you know, getting in they might, and it's not all arguments too, like it could be like going on a date, it could be kind of anything that, looking back on it, is one of those kind of moments that again seemed maybe important, or it didn't seem important at the time, but is kind of memorable after the fact. And then in the last scene, you are breaking up, and you actually role play out that breakup moment. One other thing that your characters do in the game is that they, after 3 scenes, so kind of early in the game when things are still pretty good, you're not terribly disillusioned, your characters probably don't realize they're heading for breakup yet, you know, they're trying to make it work. You leave each other a voicemail message, or some sort of message, could be written or emailed depending if you're not playing in a time period where there's voicemail or whatever, but you leave a message for the other person, and then the last thing you do is you play them back at the very end of the game, as sort of the finale of after the breakup has happened.
This feels really similar to, it occurs to me this feels really similar to 10 Candles in a way. And I have to imagine 10 Candles was at least partially an influence.
10 Candles was a huge influence over Broken. Yep.
Yeah, because obviously that's got the, you know, the ritual of the candles, and it has the message that you leave to the survivors. That's like for people who don't know, 10 Candles is a post-apocalyptic horror game by Stephen Dewey. That's really fascinating. Okay, so I think I have a good sense of like what the characters are doing, and even what the players are doing, because it sounds like the players are mostly just responsible for like narrating those like kind of slice of life flashback moments and kind of doing all the stuff that's super interesting. I want to kind of go back to like maybe like get a little abstract here and talk about like design goals. I'm a big believer, as a game designer myself, I'm a big believer in kind of focusing on design goals, right? Like, so when I was writing Brindlewood Bay, for example, major design goal was I want to design a game that shows elderly women being whole characters, like they're whole, full characters and not just caricatures, right? That was one of my design goals. I'm curious, what were some of your design goals in Broken?
Yeah, so I think I there's a few of them. I'll try to see if I can hopefully pull them out of my brain, the ones that are, and I won't forget any that I wanted to kind of share. One of the things we may touch on this later, I don't know, but I personally went through a divorce, and a pretty significantly, painful divorce. I mean, they may all be, I don't know. And I knew that I wanted to create a tragic romance game, and so I wanted one of my design goals is I wanted the game to be giving people the tools to explore those, to not just sort of experience what my experience was of going through a divorce or a breakup. I didn't want to just like have it be my story. I wanted to design something where people could have the tools to tell their own story. And so that was sort of like one of my first design goals. I wanted to design something where the mechanics and the ritual action of the game and the tone, theme, content of the stories, narrative were not divorced, but were I was a pun. I didn't mean that to be a pun, but were that they were the same, right? That like the actions you take while playing as players, like, are emblematic and reflective of the story itself. That was probably my biggest design goal, is I wanted those things to be kind of like one rather than separate. So, like, I didn't want people to just roll dice and the mechanic. I wanted something that reflected and added to the experience, so that there was potential for bleed, I guess, in a way that then was in a safe way, hopefully. So I guess another one of my design goals was creating the opportunity for out of character reflection on the kinds of experiences you have in a relationship, especially when you're going through a breakup. So building in like opportunity to reflect on empathy building and the kinds of experiences people have as they're breaking up with someone. It certainly seems like the kind of game that is going to need like a pretty robust conversation in the text about like safety tools and debrief and things like that, and bleed. I mean, maybe even just the concept of bleed. It might get in the hands of people who've never even heard of that concept, right? Because it's kind of a LARP concept, right? Yeah. So I'm curious, like, I know, but like, maybe like tell me a little bit about like, what are you doing as far as that part of it goes? And was that part of like do you consider that part of the design as well? Absolutely. I do. It was, and because of the subject matter, it was important for us, to make sure we put a lot of attention and time into that. So one of the things that we're funding through the crowdfunding campaign is that we are going to crowdfund the safety design and consulting. So we brought Bo Yeager-Sheldon of Thoughty Games, who is the designer of the script change toolset, to do design work and consulting for Broken. So the version of Broken people will get when they back the game right away, when the crowdfunding is live. The version of that game they'll get is the Ashcan edition, and the Ashcan edition does have safety tools throughout. It does. I made sure, because it was important to weave safety tools into the game, to have an addendum to the game that talks about safety tools, and to offer safety tools, and included the X card. But the final version of the game will have safety tools layered into the design rules of the actual game text, that will sort of hopefully help the game from a safety standpoint, like provide the tools to make your game safe as far as that goes, but are kind of layered into the rules in a way that they don't kind of like pull you out of the rules too much, or that it kind of flows. We really wanted the safety tools to kind of flow in the rules, and rather than feeling like a separate thing that you're just kind of throwing on top. So that's kind of the reason why we brought a safety designer in. I think it's a really good approach, especially for a game like this. I don't personally think every game needs this approach, right? Yeah. My games, for example, which are mostly like kind of they have like a certain layer of like camp and kitsch on top of them that I think gives them a certain accessibility, right? They have safety tools like as part of this sort of like introductory procedure, but they're not baked in at a system level, because well, that's not totally true, because the day and night move kind of are safety tools in their way, but I think that games that deal with sort of like very like potentially hard-hitting emotional subject matter like this one seems like it does, I think it's very wise to build them into the rule set. Let's kind of go into the mechanics a bit, because this is really interesting to me. You said earlier that you wanted the game's mechanics to sort of emulate the emotion of what was taking place, or the sort of the themes and the tone, right, and the emotion of the game. Yeah. This, of course, is this is kind of like an old Forge idea, right? Like, you have like the pulling of the tension of the Jenga tower in Dread, right? Or the 10 candles, the light going out, right? These sort of like mechanics that directly translate the emotion of like what's happening in the story. Tell me a little bit more about this like breaking objects mechanic, and importantly, like what is the gameplay like? How does the gameplay work? Absolutely, yeah. Thanks for asking. Those are my favorite kinds of games, and my favorite games like Dread, 10 Candles. Those are the games that I've been playing for years that like I just absolutely adore. Starcrossed is a huge influence on this game, and so those kinds of games are just kind of my favorite games. And I'm a priest by vocation, and we think and talk a lot about liturgy and liturgical action. And one of the things we talk about in Holy Happy Hour all the time is sort of the intersection between like liturgy and game design, and so like those things were all rattling around in my brain, and it was important for me to do that. So there is like kind of a ritual action to the game, it's all ritual action, I guess. Basically, you start the game by bringing 10 physical objects. Those could be objects that you and your play partner have picked out beforehand and brought to play. Maybe each of you brought 5 of them. Maybe one person brought all of them. Maybe both of you went thrift store shopping together beforehand to pick out 10 objects, which is one of my favorite things you can do with this game, is sort of like start playing before you sit down at the table by doing that kind of raiding your local yard sale or something. But yeah, you bring the 10 objects to the table. They have to be objects you're ready to break, willing to break. There is an alternative rules in the book to, instead of bringing 10 physical objects, bringing something like popsicle sticks and creating 10 objects together during the course of at the beginning of the game that you write on them, and then you'll snap those popsicle sticks. And that's actually a really awesome way to play. Also, I've gotten to play that way too, and it kind of, we'll see if we get into this, but it kind of makes the game subtly different in an interesting way, but this is really.
Well, go ahead and say more about that. Like what?
Well, okay, so
I'm curious about that.
Yeah, so when you bring 10 physical objects and you put them down the table in front of you, it's almost without a doubt what the objects you brought are going to influence the characters and the sort of scenario you play. Inevitably, in the games I've listened to or watched or played in of Broken, when people bring physical objects, it has such a heavy, and this is a good thing, it has a heavy influence on what kind of story they end up telling. So there's an actual play coming out very soon that I heard already where people brought like DVDs, movies to it, and it ended up taking place in a like a Blockbuster, not actually a Blockbuster, but like a movie rental place, When you use the popsicle sticks, though, it gives you so much freedom to. So one thing I didn't say about what the objects do that's kind of important to understand this is that the objects then end up serving as scene prompts. Every scene, the person who's like leading the scene is going to choose an object, and that's going to serve as a very loose scene prompt. So if somebody brings a model car, it could be that the scene is going to take place in your car, or at the drive-in theater, or at a race, or maybe it has to do with model cars actually in the scene. You can kind of use it to, you can kind of do whatever you want with it. It's meant to just sort of help you set the scene. It's not hard and fast. With the popsicle sticks, what I've noticed is when people are doing their character creation stuff for the game, the popsicle sticks, because you can write anything. So one, you end up coming up with like really crazy things that you write on the popsicle stick. Yeah. But two, people end up putting like really, really emotionally charged and personal, connected to the characters, items on the popsicle sticks. So like if I bring a DVD of My Big Fat Greek Wedding and set it down on the table to break in real life, that's one thing. But if I put, maybe my relationship is with Ben and Jason, but I put like the painting you made of me, Jason, on the popsicle stick, that's way more emotionally charged out the gate.
It occurs to me, so it kind of sounds like in this sort of like the, as you're like setting the game up, like the objects are part of like setting up the story, right? Is that fair?
Definitely.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it occurs to me that like the popsicle sticks actually give you space to do settings that are like maybe not modern day, maybe that are like more fantastical or historical. Like I'm thinking of like a sort of Dracula and Harker situation, right? Like you're not going to bring a candelabra and a chandelier to break. So the popsicle stick idea seems like a good way of doing that. That's interesting.
Yeah, because I really wanted it to be a game where people could play in fantastical settings or in like a science fiction future or something, and it is kind of easier to do that with the popsicle sticks. I mean, you could do it with objects. You just have to be really loose with your interpretation of the
interpretations
objects.
Of it. Sure. Yeah.
So so that's sort of like part of the ritual is bringing those objects, and and using them as scene prompts. And then the ritual action of the game itself as you're playing it is to one of you starts each scene as the original sort of scene prompter. You take an object, you decide which one you're going to use, and then you start prompting the scene by saying, remember when, and then sort of describing briefly like a scene. Remember when we went to the drive-in movies together and saw whatever film. The other person then responds to that by saying, but you forgot about, and they add some sort of twist or complication to the scene that the narrative tension in the scene is probably going to come from. And then you are going to role play out that scene that you've set. The person who prompted it will kind of like describe it, set it up in a little more detail. Like, all right, we're sitting in the car together. You know, the movie's like 2/3 of the way through. I've got a bucket of popcorn. You've got candy in your lap, and we're watching the movie. And then you kind of role play out the scene. And you want to. It's a shared narrative game. It's really a cooperative game. You are working to tell the story together. So you are working to become disillusioned with. We didn't talk about traits in this game, but you're working to become disillusioned. Kind of like 10 Candles, you're working to become disillusioned with the trait that each of you currently has showing. So if mine is loves bad horror movies, that's showing that you love bad horror movies is what's showing for me, which is like I have written that trait as something I love about you, like your character, like you love bad horror movies. We might work together to describe a scene where I become disillusioned with the fact that you love bad horror movies. And so I end this, every scene ends when someone feels disillusioned with their card that's showing, they burn it and they say, I used to think I used to think you loved bad horror movies. Or I used to love the fact that you are super into bad horror movies. And you might phrase it a little differently depending on what actually happened in the scene, why you became disillusioned, and then you break the object. So if it was a bad horror movie DVD in this case, then I would smash it or break it. And then you move on to the next scene.
Yeah, that's interesting. That's really fascinating. You know, I'm sitting here and I'm thinking about it, and it occurs to me that like there is a lot of possibility in terms of the types of stories you can tell and the types of like broken romances you can do, and it's a really interesting idea. I do wonder, like, and I'm curious, like, just in your playtesting and what your experience been like how much does it affect the emotional impact of the game when the setting you're doing is something that is sort of removed from your everyday experience, right? Like if we were doing like a gothic horror thing, or if we were doing a fantastical thing, do you find that you still get that like same emotional impact, or is it different? Like how much of it depends on like relatability, I guess? That's
a great question. I think that I really like that. That's a really interesting question to think about here. I think that relatability is very important for a strong impact. Because the more fantastical games that, like, especially when I think about games I've played that are more fantastical or that I've been involved in, the more fantastical ones still have a lot of like true to life relatability. So even though like the setting is like on a far out space station, or like we did magical girls in an anime, like we're in an anime season, and we're magical girls who transform into ancient superheroes that have superpowers, basically, like that kind of thing. It's the emotional investment and the emotional power came from the true to life aspects of the relationship, and like, you know, the experiences of the two in the scenes, and the fantastical stuff served as backdrop or sort of surrounding the like and that's kind of true. Like if, you know, I played an 80s rom-com sort of, you know, and we purposefully were very tongue-in-cheek in a lot of the framing in a lot of the scenes, like where we like designed them to feel like an 80s movie, so that's not like real life, it's fiction, but the like tension of but then what was cool about it, what made it so cool, and one of the things I like about this game a lot is that you're kind of inserting these relatable, like true to life things into these kind of more out there settings. So like in the 80s rom-com, right, like the framing of stuff and the kind of surrounding stuff of the story is kind of not relatable because it's straight out of an 80s movie. But the parts you get to see in the game and really take a fine look at, like sort of fine lens, is stuff that's really relatable. And there's something about the kind of like juxtaposition of that is really cool. And so I would love to see more like really out there plays throughs of the game. Like I'd love to see just like where people take it. But
Well, yeah, no, I mean, sorry, I don't want to cut you off, but like, it makes a lot of sense. Like, it makes a lot of sense because, so I don't, this is not the sort of emotional space that I design in, but I do strictly horror. But but when I'm writing horror things, the principle's kind of similar because, the thing about horror role-playing games, or horror genre in role-playing games, and I'm going to guess it's probably pretty similar in the romance genre as well, is there is a certain amount of like suspension of disbelief that has to take place in order to get into the emotional space of it, because fundamentally you're just sort of sitting around a table pretending to be scared or in love or whatever, right? And so the things that can work in horror gaming to sort of ease that, that like I call it giving the players permission to like to like get involved in it. It's things like, in the horror context, it's frequently things like little touches of humor. It is things, there are things you can do in the actual physical environmental space, if that's kind of the sort of space you're working in, I guess. But there are things you can do at the table that sort of they almost like create like a permission structure for you as a player to get invested in the pretend story we're telling, right? And to get into that emotional space. It's like, it's kind of like accessibility in a way, because it's like saying, okay, look, I'm going to be describing some really gross, horrific, terrifying things, and here's the thing that I'm giving you to make it feel accessible. And so you're sort of invited in to enjoy it, right? Brindlewood Bay does this, right? Like Brindlewood Bay uses the sort of the campy elements of like the murder mystery TV show to sort of like segue into that horror part of it, right? And so I find that really fascinating. And in the romance context, it's really, really interesting because it feels like a similar kind of like sort of intentional like suspension of disbelief you have to get into as a player in order to like get into that emotional space. I know that to you the game was a pretty personal sort of thing, but I'm curious about that sort of like, getting into the headspace of romance. I think it's a really interesting question. I don't even know what the question is.
So I think what comes to my mind is that I think this is what you just described is what I was thinking about in regards to this, which is I knew I wanted to kind of investment, right? Like you said, investment. I knew I wanted to get people invested in the characters and the relationship from the very beginning and kind of pull them into investment. This is going to sound bad. I hope you can maybe tell me if you think you know what I'm saying, but like kind of without them realizing it. Not that I didn't want them to realize it, but I don't want the rules to be like, and now you're going to get invested. I wanted to like,
and now is the time to feel love.
Exactly. Right. I wanted to like get them invested naturally, like fold some sort of investment mechanic, right, into the game so that people get pulled in and then they realize, oh wow, I'm invested before they even realize that they're invested. And so that's sort of the character creation trait process for the game does that. And then I think that I'll say why I think it does, but I think also the objects do a little bit too. I'll put a pin in that. But the way you make traits for the game very intentionally have to do with both the relationship and the other person. So like I'm going to create 5 traits that are either something I'm attracted to or like about you. I mean, when I say you, I mean the other character in the game. Or about being in a relationship with the other person. So I might say like, their dreamy brown eyes. Or I might say they like to be teased. And the game, the rules are very explicit that like these things don't need to be objectively factually correct. Like if I write down that the other person likes to be teased, that might not actually be how the other character feels, and that's
how you perceive it.
It's how I perceive it, and that actually is where tension in the scenes can come from. But and then by sharing those with each other as you're doing them, like you kind of naturally, I think, become invested in each character, not just your own, and the relationship itself. Like when you write down like he would never tell me a lie. Like you are just layering in this like player and character investment that you're setting yourself up to become disillusioned with later. So part of it is, like I say, without you realizing it, but like, you know, most people will kind of realize what they're doing as they're doing it, and kind of be aware that they're setting themselves up for that as they go forward. And if you want to play, but one of the things is it gives you a lot of tools, right? Like you can set yourself up for something really intense by writing kind of intense traits, or you can keep it lighthearted depending on like what you write down, and it kind of gives you the control to do that. And then the objects, especially when you do the popsicle stick, the objects definitely give you that opportunity as well. And then I think like as far as like it's interesting to me how much horror games were an influence over this game, which is not a horror game at all, it's a romance game. I guess it's the horrors of love, right? So it kind of it's not I don't know. To me, in my head, there's a lot of similarities, and horror games were a huge influence over my design. I play a lot of horror games. Where was I going with that?
They're in the same like they're in the same sort of emotional territory, in the sense of like when your emotions are like very high, you know, like I think when you feel like fear and when you feel love, those are like spiked emotions that you don't feel just like on a daily basis, right? So I think that's probably a lot of the similarity, right? You know, like they are not like the mundane feelings. They are feelings that happen in somewhat rarefied circumstances, and when you feel them, they are overwhelming, right? And so I think that's probably why they feel similar, you know.
Well, another thing that I think does kind of what you're talking about is a mechanic that obviously is also in 10 Candles, and that's the voicemail mechanic. I was actually really
let's talk about that.
So I was actually really hesitant to include the voicemail mechanic in the game because of 10 Candles, and 10 Candles was like one of the original influences on designing the game. Like the earlier version of this game was much more of a 10 Candles hack. It kind of started that way, and I then designed away from it. And I didn't even at that point have a voicemail mechanic in the game. So I was hesitant to include the voicemail mechanic, but it is the right mechanic for this game ultimately, which is why I then included it, which I'm very glad that I did, because it feels so different than what the voicemail mechanic does in 10 Candles, which is why I was okay with it. Because like in 10 Candles, like the fact that you're playing this after everyone has died does a particular thing, right? And the fact that people leave the message before you have played any scenes also does a particular thing. In Broken, you wait 3 scenes deep before you leave a voicemail.
Okay.
The voicemail is so tied to what's been happening in the game that to me already makes it feel very different from the way you do it in 10 Candles. That might seem like a trivial thing, but I really do think it's substantial.
No, the order of play, things like that make a big difference, right? Yeah.
And then like at the end of the game, like when you play them back, it's so personal, and like kind of that's anytime I've cried playing Broken, it is definitely because of the voicemails. And I have teared up and gotten emotional, not from hearing the voicemail, but from remembering what I said as we're about to go and play it, because now I know the other person's about to hear it for the first time. And like a lot of times without realizing it, like the stuff you leave in that voicemail ends up being even though you meant it to be kind of sweet at the time, it kind of ends up being the things that come out as themes in the breakup as you're going forward. And then you kind of like realize at the end of the game, like, oh no, like I said X, Y, and Z, but then we said all of this stuff after that. So it just like hits in a different way at the end of the game. And so yeah, it's probably. I'm glad I kept it. It's like really important mechanic for the game. It feels very different than it does. I think it does in Ten Candles. Um,
It sounds great.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I am
I
wondering
love
what
that. Yeah.
in the chat. Mossberg made a comment. Mossberg is on Pot of Love, and so we have an actual play of Broken dropping tomorrow on Pot of Love that Mossberg was in. And so I'm not sure when he says in the chat it replicates the lovey-dovey, can't do anything wrong stage of relationship. I don't know if he's talking about when you leave the voicemail or not. He might be.
Oh yeah.
But yeah, I'd be curious to see if he responds to that. But yeah.
That's really fascinating. Well, so okay, I want to go back to like the settings and stuff because
Sure.
this is something that was intriguing to me as I was reading through some of the introductory materials she sent me.
Yeah.
Which is the game going to have like scenarios or like situations or kind of like story starter type things? Because right now it does feel pretty wide open in terms of like what you can do with the game, and that's great for some groups, but a lot of groups would maybe like ideas or guidance for what types of stories they can do. So what's your plan for like, I guess, scenarios? Are there going to be such a thing?
Yeah, I'm really hyped about scenarios. I had this idea at some
Okay.
point when we were building things up towards releasing the game. Sorry, I had two thoughts going simultaneously at the same time about this, because like, it kind of is linked to something that happened earlier in the design phase too. Now that I think about it, but anyway, I was really hyped to do scenarios because of what you just said. Like, not everybody's gonna like be able to just sort of whole cloth like come up with something off the top of their head. I wanted to give people maybe tools. I wanted to do two things. I wanted to give people like, okay, here's a scenario. I can sit down, 2 characters, 10 objects, a setting, a meet cute, how these 2 characters came together, 10 traits, all pre-written package given to someone. You can just boom, play the game. It won't come with actual 10 physical objects to break, at least for now, I guess.
Sure.
But
Right,
you could write them on popsicle sticks, or you could go find these equivalent objects, depending on what they are, and you have like a pre-written scenario. But the thing I really was excited about being able to do scenarios was being able to bring in guest writers, designers to write
that's
scenarios.
interesting. Okay.
That's what got me excited about it, because I love to see what other people do with things, and so I wanted to see what kinds of scenarios other people would come up with. So I decided to make doing the scenarios as an addition to the book as a stretch goal for the campaign. So our funding the final version ebook, the digital version of the game, is a $1,200 goal with the campaign, and then there is a stretch goal, and I decided to just announce it right out the gate, that we have a $1,700 stretch goal, and that will give us 6 scenarios. Now, I think the one scenario will probably just be in the book right out the gate, because it's already been written. It was written by Melissa Wallace, who is my Pod of Love co-host and my spouse, and so I think that one will probably be included in the final version of the game. No matter what, I think if we don't hit that stretch goal, I'm not 100% sure about that, but I think so. My hope is that we'll be able to bring in the rest of these designers. So we've got a great group of designers, people like Emily Buzza, who does writing for comic books and writing on comics. It is going to come on to do a superhero comic themed scenario. So that's exactly the kind of thing I wanted to do. Bring people who have like different perspectives and let them kind of run with it. Some people who I just wanted to be like, whatever they want to come up with, they can do. Be as creative as you want, and feel free with the objects to like think outside the box, because the popsicle sticks option. So
I love that. That's actually a pretty good segue into itch funding, because this is interesting to me. I don't do any business on itch personally, and I know just a little bit about itch funding and kind of as it is in terms of it, like as a method of raising money. I'm curious, like, well, first of all, like why did you choose itch funding, and then second, like you've already kind of said, but like what is the like what are you trying to fund to create, I guess, but you've already kind of said that, but if you want to go into it more, I suppose.
Yeah, sure.
But like itch funding, like I'm curious about itch funding as a choice.
Yeah, well, okay. So like you kind of mentioned when you were talking about Brindlewood Bay, this idea of like learning and growing, from Ape on Games, we just itch funded our first game, The Hard Lessons, in May, and now we're itch funding the second release. Both of these releases, as they stand right now, are ebooks or digital releases of the game. There's a number of different reasons why itch funding was an appealing model for us to go forward, rather than say an alternative like Kickstarter or Indiegogo, or this, several options out there. But part of the thinking thought process here was that a company like us that are getting our feet on the ground and don't necessarily have a ton of capital, but like to invest up front into doing a book, but have time and energy and other resources that aren't capital resources. We thought what we could do is release games with a nice polished digital version, and get that funding capital through a model like itch funding, which the nice thing about itch funding is that it's not an all or nothing crowd fund like say a Kickstarter is, where you're sort of looking to get all that capital up front with the Kickstarter. A lot of times I think companies have to invest a lot themselves beforehand in order to get to that point.
Absolutely, yeah.
With itch funding, we are able to sort of set some kind of goalpost goals rather than like one big end goal. So like, for example, with this campaign, we have several goals. There's a $600 goal, which essentially pays for when people back the game, they'll get the game immediately. So that's one of the things that makes it really, different from like a Kickstarter, right? Like people are going to get the Ashcan edition of the game, but it is a full version of the game, basically. I mean, it's a full color. I think it looks great. I'm proud of it. It's something that's like, in some ways you could say done. It's not the final version, but it's a pretty complete version of the game that someone gets right away and can start playing the game immediately. And they're also investing in the game. And that first $600 fundraising goal, that first $600 fundraising goal basically pays for that Ashcan edition. It funds that, and it begins getting the ball rolling of funding the final version. And the $1,200 goal, which is our the full completed game book, the full ebook, it'll fund the safety design and consulting that I mentioned. It'll fund editing, layout, design and consultation, basically the pieces that are kind of left still that we want to make it a fully polished final book where the game is finished, the core game, the main game is something like scenarios. Games are never finished in some ways, right? You can always, like, the scenarios are as an addition, but like the game itself is done, and that's that $1,200 goal. And if we hit that goal, people will get that. They've already gotten that Ashcan edition. They'll get that final version of the book in ebook form, in digital form. And then we have a goal of $1,700, which is the scenarios, as I mentioned, to fund that as well. So, the itch funding, there's a few reasons I think why we went with that platform rather than say a Kickstarter. The fact that it's sort of a mix between crowdfunding and purchasing, where you are getting a book right away. But you're helping us sort of snowball into a final version of this game. I also, one of the things I've been thinking about is actually has to do with you and I. We were talking about Brindlewood Bay a month ago here on the show, and one of the things that sort of stuck in my head was, the fact that Brindlewood Bay is, and a lot of times this happens with Kickstarters, right? That game's been out there for a long time. People have been playing it for a long time. One of the things about itch funding with Broken is that I really want to connect with players. I really want to get the game out there, and get people the game, get it into their hands, get people invested in it in that way. And so
I think that's smart. Yeah, I think that's super smart. Like we've talked about this before, but like our model is very like plain, right? Like we put out a very polished version that you get to enjoy for 2 or 3 years, and then eventually we do crowdfunding, right? That's how we did Trophy. That's how we did Brindlewood Bay. That's how we're going to do the Between. And so that makes a lot of sense. I find that there's a tricky thing in indie RPGs that you have to find a way to navigate, which is that there is a fire hose of content, right? Like there are new games coming out all the time, and that's great. We live in the golden age of like brand new games, right? Um, but but it does make it difficult to make sure that your game is not like here today, gone today, right? Like you want your game to find an audience, and finding an audience is probably, if I had to name like the number one problem for like new games entering the market, it is absolutely finding a player base, right?
Absolutely.
And so I think it's very wise to like to sort of like put out a polished digital version that sort of lives out there and gets a chance to collect ahead of Steam, because maybe down the line you do something like more with it, right? And so you'll be kind of set up for that. But that's really interesting. We kind of touched on it a little bit. I don't know how much time we have left, but like we touched on it a little bit, and I'm really intrigued by the fact that this project was so personal to you, right? Like so like when I was writing Brindlewood Bay, this is something I've only talked about a little bit publicly, but when I was writing Brindlewood Bay, I was in the middle of thinking I was dying of cancer, right? And something about writing the game, I was almost like trying to like manifest the idea of getting old. I was writing this game thinking that, in the middle of thinking I might not get a chance to be an old person, right? Like I had that in my mind as I was doing it. And so that did drive me in a certain way. In a certain sense, I was kind of driven by that a little bit, or at the very least, I appreciated the irony of it, right? I'm curious about, like, you said that like the idea for this was originally spurred by your divorce. And I guess like I'm kind of curious about more just like you as a creator and like your sort of like philosophy of like the game design. Like, how important is it that you have that emotional connection to the game,
So is the question like, do you mean kind of generally? Do you mean for this specific game, or do you mean like kind of
just,
generally?
Generally speaking, or maybe even like the games you choose to run and play, right? Like, I'm just curious, like how important is that to you?
That's a really good question. Like,
or like spirituality, how much does that play a role? Like that's
these are great questions, and I appreciate them. When I designed this game, I knew I wanted it to be like, I knew this game was going to kind of be my memoir of my divorce, if that makes any sense. I know it's like a weird way of talking about it. Like, and I do include in the book like a letter from me, which is like a short sort of memoir of my divorce and writing this game for people, which kind of sets the tone for the game. And it's weird to think like, I wanted a game to be a memoir. Like, it's not telling my story, but it's like giving people the tools to tell these kinds of stories. That was kind of what I wanted to be my memoir to be. I do think that, like, just naturally, and maybe not fully intentionally, like when I do design, I just sort of naturally go to, I mean, maybe it's simply the principle of writing what you know, but I think like it's certainly easier for me to create and work in creating in spaces where I'm emotionally connected to it, or I feel emotionally tied to it. I'm a pretty emotional person, and I think in an emotional space, and so I think like that's important to me. But it's a really good question as to whether or not that's the case, like generally speaking for me. I'm not sure if I know the answer to that without kind of taking more time to reflect on it. But it's a really interesting question, because you even like tying in a spiritual piece and saying spirituality. I mean, like, I don't think I consciously knew, Jason, that like okay, I mean, I knew that I was doing ritual and using liturgical thinking in designing this game, and I'm a priest. It wasn't lost on me. Like, I knew what I was doing. I knew that was like, but I never, but it never, there was like one step removed of that I don't know if I ever took, which is like, is this how I personally design games, by thinking liturgically, or is it like this game that I think, and I don't know if I don't think I ever took that next mental step, or if I've just like lived in those spaces so long that they've become Like,
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's like I think it's kind of one of those. I mean, it probably is the sort of thing that just depends on like project to project and game to game, and like maybe like I consider game running and game design to be very very close cousins. They're like one chromosome removed from each other, in my opinion. And so so for me, from my vantage point, I was in a really really deep kind of like emotional dark space when I was writing Brindlewood Bay, and Brindlewood Bay helped me like kind of work through it. It was like therapeutic, just the act of working on it was therapeutic, but it was dealing with some themes and subject matters that were particularly relevant to what I was kind of going through, but the between was not. There's nothing about the between that has any, that was I just like Penny Dreadful's a TV show and I wanted to make Penny Dreadful game, So I guess there's probably not like a one size fits all answer for anyone really, to be honest. But I did find it to be a fascinating, it's fascinating to me that is sort of like what was the initial impetus for the game.
Oh yeah,
right?
well, without a doubt, this game came straight out of all my I'm trying to remember if there was a specific moment when I made the decision. There probably was.
I absolutely could not reach the point of designing a game like Broken because I, as a person, I don't know if I'm like a romantic or I've never really thought of myself in that way, but I don't possess the part of the brain that like gets romantic. It's not a part of the brain that I like have. And so like even when I broke up with my partner of we've been together 5 or 6 years, I was upset about it, but like it but I kind of like processed it pretty quickly. It like moved on to the next thing, and so like for me, like if I were playing Broken, there's a certain amount of true suspension of disbelief that I would have to engage in to try, I would have to like trick myself into getting emotionally invested in it. Right. I can still enjoy it and have fun with it, but but that's why I could never design the game.
Yeah.
Right? I could never achieve this kind of design because I don't have that kind of, I just don't have that kind of like emotional motivations in my life. I can't reach that. Right.
Yeah.
And so I just find it fascinating. Like it's a fascinating thing to me. Whereas I do understand like how certain emotions do drive my design though, right? Like sure. I love horror and I immerse myself in horror. I literally immerse myself in horror. Like I go out in the middle of the night and I listen to horror movie soundtracks on my headphones and walk around in the dark, right? Like I like to immerse myself in being scared, right? And so I understand how emotion can like drive the design, and so I just find it fascinating.
Yeah, and one thing we didn't talk about on this was I spent the last 5 years co-hosting Pot of Love, which is a romance and relationship actual play podcast, right, yeah. And so my wife Melissa and I, and our producer Sean, we all kind of spent all that time like really immersed in romance and relationship TTRPGs, especially 2-player ones. So we had tons of experience in the genre. I'm a huge fan of the romance genre in general. I love, I talk about this in the letter I wrote at the beginning of the game. I'm a hopeless romantic. I love rom-coms. I even love trashy romance reality television. I'm the kind of person that my version of going out into at night and listening to horror movie soundtracks in the dark, my version of that is watching Love is Blind on Netflix and getting way too invested in the people on the show and what's going on with them. It's so interesting because when you were describing doing that for horror, me watching Love is Blind popped into my head because I was that is literally the thing that I'm doing when I watch that show, because I'm making a conscious choice to immerse myself in the genre, in the experience of the other, and I'm letting myself do that in a way that's okay.
And how it makes you feel.
Yes.
Right? Yeah.
Yes. I'm breaking down the barriers. I'm going to suspend disbelief. I'm going to choose to care more about these people than I really ought to. And for the experience of doing it, right? And that's just kind of what I love to do. And I also love sad and I love tragic stories. I love sad things, sad stories. I'm a sucker for it. And so I love to have play experiences that are just sad or really emotional. And then to kind of go back to your original question, I was thinking about as a player. So like you asked as a GM, when I in my head flipped that over to as a player, like some things that clicked in my head were thinking about how like my favorite games to play as a player are without a doubt the ones where I've been the most emotionally invested in the characters and stuff. You know, like Mossberg said in the chat about emotional investment may not be a requirement to have fun, but for him, but man, the ones that do seem to be his favorite. And I was thinking about like the best games of 10 Candles I've ever had, or like the best RPG experiences I've had are the ones where like me as a player, I've been like super extra emotionally invested in like the character interactions, the relationships, and the story in a way that probably is sad. Like maybe there's someone who has to make a sacrifice, or like moments where I've had the opportunity to do self-sacrifice and those things, where there's like tragedy and hope, so sorrow, but also beauty. And that intersection is definitely where as like someone who plays RPGs, that's where I love to play. It's space I love to play.
Yeah, I think that's what I was getting at. I mean, like I don't ever play, so I think I only understand things as a GM.
Yeah,
but like I play like once a year basically.
Yeah. That used to be me. It was perpetual GM before, but now I get to play a lot.
I choose it. I prefer to be the GM. I don't like playing, but like, or it's not my preferred way of doing RPGs. But no, but that's kind of what I was getting at. Like I'm very interested in like this idea that like emotional immersion, that you can translate that into like gameplay experiences, right? Like it's a fascinating idea to me. Like I said, I literally scare myself so that I am in tune with the emotion of fear, so that when I'm running a game, I feel like I can convey it better. You know, like it's a whole thing. Okay, well, so I think we'll go ahead and kind of start wrapping up here. Well, I am kind of curious, actually, before we wrap up completely. Do you have any other like irons in the fire game wise?
Yes, we definitely. So Apon Games definitely does, and I kind of talked about that a little bit at the beginning of the stream. Oh, nice! Lone Ranger in the chat says he's about to make the tragic cocktail. Sorry, that's really exciting. Our cocktail, for those who are watching who don't know, maybe the cocktail from the beginning of the episode. Apon Games is, as I mentioned at the beginning, in the like. You know, we are releasing this cyberpunk system neutral campaign setting called New Kurai City. That I am not doing much of the design on and the writing for. That's my partner, Joshua Wise, is doing most of the writing for that. And I will probably do some design for it, but not like a ton. But that is a project I'm very invested in, and that's going to be our Patreon release. I'm hoping that I don't want to say a lot about this yet because it's still a little bit out.
You don't want to give me an exclusive on your show.
Exactly. Well, yeah, exactly. Something's there. I think there's going to be some similar stuff. So we're doing this setting release, this campaign setting release through a Patreon model, and I think that in the future I'm going to be doing more of that I'll be involved in. So obviously that's just like the most vague thing I could say, so I'm sorry for folks, but that's good. As far as other stuff that I'm personally working on, I have a couple of other things that I do want to bring to full release. Tony down there for +1 EXP says save it tomorrow for my show. That's really funny. I guess we'll have to see tomorrow. So we've been in playtest for a game that I wrote called Bizlandia, which is a using the Questlandia SRD.
Oh, it's Questlandia. Okay, cool. Yeah.
It is a workplace sitcom comedy, a workplace sitcom game, basically. And it is world building and sitcom-y in the way that like Questlandia is. You like make a business in an industry, a fantastical one, and I mean it could be true to life. It could be like a real life type business, but also be sci-fi or fantasy or something like that. And then you make characters and you basically do improv comedy inside the the company that you make. It's like I feel vain saying this, but it's really, I don't feel like it. For me, it's not vain because I don't really even feel like I get credit for it. But like the games of Bizlandia I've been involved in playtesting are the funniest freaking TTRPG experiences I've ever had. Like that game produces some of the funniest freaking like gameplays. It's so funny. Like we died laughing every time we have play tested the game. Like it baffles me because I don't think I'm a particularly funny person. I don't think like if I was like writing, I do comedy stuff sometimes on our streams and stuff, but like I don't feel like I'm a comedy writer. The game is so funny. Like it's so funny.
Okay.
The tools for producing the comedy just are there. And so that's a game I really do want to end up seeing a final version of because I think it's just begging for it. Like people love Questlandia. It's super fun, and like the opportunities for making a really cool final book are just there, right? Like because it's like workplace, like making it look like a workplace resource book you would be handed
like a corporate training
yes
manual
exactly
or something. Yeah,
exactly. Like it's just so it's right there. It like it like makes itself. So like I do want to see a final version of that. I don't know what the timeline for that is exactly, but that's like something in my head that I want to keep working on at some point. You know, we do have a lot of coals in the fire at Apon Games. We have a new website. It's apongames.com. And if people go to apongames.com, they can like click on, there's like a roadmap button so they can see like what as a company we're going to be releasing, because we've got the final version of the hard lessons to finish and put out, the final version of Broken to finish and put out, and the so that we've got a bunch of content we're planning on releasing, a bunch of games we have kind of slated, but those are really the only ones to talk about.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Well, so itch funding for Broken is tomorrow, right?
Yes.
For people not watching live, I guess that we're going to say the 19th of July.
Yes.
In the morning, I gather?
Yeah, first thing in the morning. I guess it's going to go live at
awesome.
8 a.m. That's the plan. Eastern time, I should say. 8 a.m. Eastern time. That's my time.
Well, Ben, thank you for coming on your show.
Thanks.
To talk to me about your game.
And by the way, if people are watching this live, can I real quick? I just want to throw out there that if people want to get notified in the morning when the game goes live, or notified tomorrow via email, it's not too late. I did drop the link in the chat, but it's bit.ly/broken launch, and people can confirm their email address, and then they can get notified when the game goes live. And then tomorrow, it's just bit.ly/broken game will take you to the itch page. People can also just find apongames.itch.io. We'll be able to find it that way. So just also throw that out there on my show, just so people know where to find it tomorrow. Sorry.
Awesome. Well, I think my part is done.
Thank you, Jason.
I will turn it over to you.
Thank you for such a wonderful interview. Being reverse interviewed on this show
You're very welcome. Yeah.
It was a lot of fun, and you are just absolutely wonderful at doing interviews, just as you are at running games.
I felt like I had to do it because I make someone on our network interview me whenever we're doing a Kickstarter or interview the designer of the game. So it's a thing. I was like, you know what? I don't know if Ben has anyone he can make go do an interview of him. So I will go do it for him.
I really we kind of had one of our Apon folks interviewed Josh and I on Friday when we did our launch stream, and we didn't make him, but we asked him to do it. And Chris Zumsky, he did a fabulous job doing it. But for Broken specifically, no, I don't think this wouldn't have happened if you hadn't made your generous and kind offer. So I do appreciate it.
I'm happy to do it. Thank you.
And as it kind of came up in the chat, tomorrow at noon, I'm going to be on +1 EXP for a launch stage stream. So that's going to be fun. Looking forward to that.
Nice, good.
And then on Friday, on Friday on the All Ports Open Twitch channel, we're going to be doing, this is going to be really fun. So Tyler from Possible Worlds Games is going to come on, and we're going to be doing a like stream of love from Pot of Love. So it's going to be Tyler, Melissa, and I. We're going to play Dating.sim, which is a Possible Worlds game, which is like a reality TV show game, and we're going to make characters get together in that, and then we're going to break them up in Broken.
Oh, that's cool. Oh, that actually reminded me of something I was
Yeah.
thinking of, like in
Yeah.
the middle of the chat. In Codex, we published a game, a two-player game
Oh, okay.
that's called "And Then They Met,"
Oh.
and it's you play the characters right up until the point when they first meet.
Yes. Oh
So
my gosh.
yeah, so the game is all about like basically like the little intentional and inadvertent like evidence and messages of yourself you leave to that person in places that you like
Oh
that
my
you like
gosh. I love this.
that you like run it. Yeah, that like so like if you accidentally like dropped your you dropped your wallet in a club or something, or like you
Yeah.
accidentally did this or that, and then the game ends at the precise moment that they like lay eyes on each other for the first time.
So it's like
and
How I Met Your Mother, but the TTRPG.
yeah. It's basically that. Yeah. It's in Codex Love 2, I think. So yeah, maybe check that out if you are just looking for more games in this genre.
Well, yeah,
it's a cool game. It's really good.
Pot of Love's been on hiatus for a while, but it's coming. It's back right now because we're doing these mini series of doing actual plays of Broken. One of the things that's been really fun, Jason, like for I know we're continuing on with the interview here, but one of the things that's been really fun with Broken is doing these like mashups. So we did one with Alchemistresses, which is the magical girl game I mentioned earlier, where we made characters for the game Alchemistresses, and then we played Broken with them. And then we're doing dating.
I like it a lot. Yeah, it's really good. I could see it in so many different contexts, right?
Yes.
Like in my games, in the between, in my like some of the APs we're doing, we have characters that clearly have like in the between. It's not really romance, but it's it's romance, Hargrave House style romance.
Yeah.
But I like the idea of like having a side thing where we like see their tumultuous breakup. That could be fun too. I will mention that to my players in the Shadow Society campaign. I'll be very excited about that idea.
Yeah, I mean, feel free to play Broken and let me know if you want to do it on anything. But yeah, we were actually talking about this, and I think it was on stream on Friday that my co-founder Josh suggested that, and I think we'll probably do this, that we actually like include something in the book about doing mashups. So like how to kind of mash up Broken with other games, because it's just kind of become one of the things you do with it. Like it just kind of happened, and like and
it's such a universal emotion, like right, like characters in other games are going to fall in love, right? Like it's a thing that's going to happen. So yeah, it's pretty cool. I think, especially I think if you can like kind of keep it like as a side story, like it's a pretty cool idea, like if you have like a longer campaign, it could be kind of fun. Okay, we're way off track.
Yes. Well, can you tell people real quick if they don't know like where to find you and what you do? I
am on Twitter at Jason Cordova 6. That's just no spaces or anything. And then the Gauntlet, which is the organization I'm in charge of, is at gauntlet-rpg.com. And I also co-host a podcast called Fear of a Black Dragon, which is about old school gaming modules. And so go look that up on your pod catcher of choice.
Awesome. Jason, thank you so much for coming back on the show.
Hey, thanks for having me on.
Holy Happy Hour. I have a feeling in my gut this won't be the last time you ever come on Holy Happy Hour. So, maybe next time... I think is the Between the next release you all have planned from Gauntlet Publishing?
Yeah, it's not for a while, but yeah.
So there you go. Like we'll see. Maybe we can get you on to talk about the Between once that happens. I have not played the Between,
fun.
So maybe they'll give me an excuse to force Blaine Martin to run it for me between now and then. Anyway, all right. Well, thank you. I'm going to ask Jason to hang around in my digital green room here as we wrap the show up. And so thank you, Jason. I'm going to go back to just me here on the screen for you all. Huge thanks to Jason for taking. This was such a awesome thing for Jason to do, to take the time to come on and interview me on my show, Holy Happy Hour. Thank you all for watching the show. I appreciate you hanging around. Don't forget those links, as I mentioned. I put a link in the chat to how folks can get notified when the game goes launches tomorrow morning. If you're watching this later, you can find Broken on apongames.itch.io. And the links will be down below here in the video. So you can hit follow here on Twitch, and we would greatly appreciate it. You could be like Mossberg in the chat and subscribe to the channel, and I would be just ever so grateful if you did. It's such a cool way to support what we do here on Holy Happy Hour Batman and the All Pros Open Network. If you only caught part of tonight's show, you can watch it for a brief time on demand on Twitch. You can watch it at You can watch it at allportsopen.com, where you can watch every episode of the show. Afterward, you can go to Holy Happy Hour Batman on YouTube if you're not already watching it there, and you can subscribe to the YouTube channel. Don't forget to hit the bell so you can get notified whenever we're having a live video like right now, or when we have a new episode go up of Holy Happy Hour. So huge thanks to Joshua Wise, my Apon co-founder, for the artwork on the stream and for everything he does for the network. Don't forget to check out our Patreon so that we can so you can check out our awesome new cyberpunk setting, New Korai City, there on Patreon. Huge thanks to Doctor Octoroc for the use of his music on the show, which you're going to hear in just a moment. So I have been Ben. I'm that gamer priest on social media, and we have a really exciting episode next week. Gabriel Robinson's going to be coming on the show. Somebody who does, speaking of the Gauntlet, someone who does trophy content and releases games, horror games himself. He's going to be coming on the show to talk about therapy and TTRPGs and sort of the intersection of those two things. He's not a therapist, but we're going to be talking about therapeutic D&D and some of the stuff he does around that. Or not, I said D&D. Wow, that was quite a slip. That not usually guilty of making on the show, making that synonymous with TTRPGs. But I guess every now and then it rears its ugly head. All right, so thank you all so much for watching. Broken launches tomorrow morning as you're watching this live at 8 a.m. I appreciate you considering supporting the game, watching this stream. I hope you all have a great night, the holiest and happiest of hours, as I always say. Here's a quick ad for our show Delinquent Comics, and I hope you all have an absolutely fantastic night.
Calling all citizens of Halcyon City. The newest generation of heroes are now painting the pages of Delinquent Comics, a Masks new generation actual play podcast. Complete back issues are available now on allportsopen.com, Spotify, iTunes, or wherever podcasts are found. You can help join the fight and hear the newest releases early by becoming a supporter on Patreon at patreon.com/allportsopen. New bi-weekly episodes become available to all citizens on May 24th, featuring the newest arc, the Sunset Island Saga.